A drunken tourist threw a bottle at the guard, thinking he was in charge. But the soldier's reaction shocked everyone, and this was just the beginning. A warm morning in London bathed Buckingham Palace in golden light, highlighting its grandeur. Tourists, like ants, swarmed the square. Cameras clicked non-stop. Children's shrieks blended with adult chatter, and some were already munching on breakfast sandwiches or ice cream. A few were angling for the perfect selfie with the immobile guard, a symbol of British resilience. He stood, as always, motionless, a tall man around 30, with a serious face and a posture so straight it seemed measured with a ruler. His red uniform with gold buttons gleamed in the sunlight, and his bearskin hat added a touch of majesty to his appearance. But make no mistake, this was not just a uniform, it was a symbol. Every gesture, even his stillness, seemed to declare, "I am here to protect the honor of my country, not to entertain a crowd." Yet, as with every barrel of honey, there's always a drop of tar. And today that tar came in the form of John. This man, about 40 years old, with a scruffy beard and disheveled hair, burst into the scene like thunder on a clear day. In one hand, he clutched a nearly empty beer bottle, and in the other, his blatant disregard for the surroundings. John stood out among the well-dressed tourists with his wrinkled gray t-shirt and ripped jeans. He looked as though he had wandered in by accident, but he clearly belonged to that class of people who believe the world revolves around them. "Hey, look at him!" John suddenly yelled, his eyes fixed on the guard. His voice was loud, almost demanding, and immediately drew attention. "This guy doesn't even blink. What is he, a mannequin?" The crowd froze for a moment, then a chuckle rippled through. Someone pulled out a phone, anticipating content. Others shook their heads disapprovingly. Some turned away, as if embarrassed by the scene. The guard, of course, didn't move. His face remained as impassive as it had been a moment ago. But if you were observant, you might have noticed a subtle flicker in his cold, piercing eyes as they lingered on John. But this was John, and silence from the guard, naturally, was taken as a challenge. "Oh. What? Can't even say a word," John continued, inching closer to the white line that separated the crowd from the guard. "Come on, move just once." At this point, an elderly couple standing nearby had had enough. The woman, with neatly coiffed gray hair and a small hat, whispered angrily to her husband, "This is disgraceful. How dare he act like this?" But John, of course, didn't hear. Or perhaps he heard but ignored her, because John was the kind of man who thought that being a tourist automatically made him royalty. And in his mind, royalty could do whatever it wanted. He took another swig of his beer, draining the bottle, then let it fall to the ground with a loud clink. The bottle didn't break, but the sound was loud enough to draw the crowd's attention. "Hey guys, watch this. I'm gonna make him move," John declared, turning to his friends who laughed. The laughter was loud but strained, as if even they were uncomfortable with his antics. Swaying slightly, John bent down to pick up the bottle he had just dropped. His movements were sharp but clumsy, the telltale signs of too much alcohol. Holding the bottle above his head, he turned back to his friends, his drunken grin stretching wide across his face. "What do you think, guys? If I throw this, will he finally move?" He waved the bottle in the air, clearly expecting cheers. "What's the big deal? He can't do anything anyway." The crowd began to stir. The murmurs grew louder, and faces started to divide into two camps. Those who openly disapproved of John and those who were recording, anticipating a viral video. "This is too much," the woman in the green hat whispered, clutching her purse tightly. "Why doesn't someone stop him?" But of course, no one stepped in. People like John always acted too fast for others to intervene. "Stop! You're crossing the line," someone in the crowd called out. The voice belonged to a young man in glasses, but his words were drowned out by the laughter of John's friends. John only smirked. Turning toward the speaker, he raised the bottle higher and replied mockingly, "Listen, I'm a tourist, okay? I paid for this trip. I can do whatever I want." The crowd gasped as John suddenly hurled the bottle toward the guard. At that moment, time seemed to freeze. The crowd stood still. The bottle arced through the air, its trajectory clear. Everyone watching expected the same thing. The bottle would hit the motionless soldier square in the chest, but in the last instant, the guard moved. It was a lightning-fast step to the side, so precise it seemed choreographed. The bottle missed him entirely, crashing loudly against the metal gates and shattering into hundreds of sharp shards. "Did you see that? He dodged it," someone in the crowd exclaimed, their voice filled with surprise and a hint of admiration. But the guard didn't flinch. He straightened, adjusted his hat, and resumed his position as though nothing had happened. The scene only amplified his dignity, his absolute discipline. John, however, wasn't done. He wasn't just angry, he was humiliated. In his drunken mind, the guard's calm reaction was a personal insult. He, a tourist, had thrown the bottle, and this man in the red uniform had dared to dodge it without reacting. "Oh, you think you're a hero, huh?" John shouted, his face redder than ever, his voice high-pitched and grating. "Come on, show me what you've got." He stepped forward, crossing the white line that had seemed an unspoken boundary for everyone else. The crowd held its breath. Someone closed their eyes, unable to watch any further, and then a clear, cold voice rang out, "Step back, immediately." It was the guard. His words cut through the noise like a blade. Even John froze for a moment. The guard stared directly at him. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. It was a reminder that the man standing before John was not just wearing a red uniform. He represented a tradition that would not be disgraced. The crowd gasped, but this time out of respect. Even the skeptics felt that this moment was more than just a clash between a drunk tourist and a soldier. It was a display of honor and discipline. John, of course, didn't understand. Blinded by anger and alcohol, he pushed further, stepping closer to the guard. The crowd waited, breathless, for what would happen next. Before John could make another wild gesture or shout something foolish, a firm hand landed on his shoulder. He turned, first startled and then visibly unsettled. Standing before him was a security officer. Dressed in a black uniform, the officer stared at John with a cold gaze, as though John were nothing more than an unpleasant task that needed to be handled. Behind him stood two more officers, ready to step in if necessary. "Sir, you are under arrest for disturbing the peace," the officer said icily. His voice was steady, clear, and devoid of any emotion, like a blade slicing through the air. "What? You can't do this!" John yelled. His face now flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation. He tried to pull away, but the officers held him firmly. "It was just a joke. I didn't do anything." Didn't do anything, of course. In John's world, throwing a bottle at someone and invading their personal space was a trivial matter. "Really, John, do you actually believe that?" Of course not. Even his friends, who had been laughing just a moment ago, were now quietly slipping into the crowd. They seemed to decide it was safer and cheaper to stay spectators than to get involved with the police. The crowd came alive. People began clapping. It wasn't just applause, it was a true act of support. Someone shouted loudly, "That's how it's done. Respect the traditions if you don't want trouble." A few in the crowd started recording the scene. Phone cameras focused on John, who was now being led away from the white line, away from the guard, and out of the scene entirely. He kept trying to yell something in his defense, but his words were lost in the noise of the crowd. "Hey, "Wait, it was just a joke," he shouted, looking around as if searching for someone to back him up. But there was no support. Everyone looked at him with either disapproval or outright satisfaction at the justice being served. And the guard? He remained as still as ever. His gaze, fixed straight ahead, seemed to say, "My duty is to rise above this. This is my calling." Then, a small boy, clutching a tiny British flag, timidly approached the white line and held it out. The guard gave a slight nod. That subtle gesture, though nearly imperceptible, carried immense symbolism, filling the hearts of the crowd with admiration. Meanwhile, John was being led away amidst the applause. His shameful exit was already being recorded on dozens of phones. Within minutes, the footage would flood the internet, and headlines like "Drunken Tourist Disrupts Order, but Guard Shows Who's Boss" would start racking up likes. And indeed, later, comments under the videos reflected the public's sentiment. "Bravo to the guard. Such composure. This tourist is a disgrace to humanity. Respect the traditions. Best moment of the day, when he was escorted out to cheers." John became a meme. The video of his arrest spread online faster than he could have explained himself to his friends. Shame and a fine were all that remained of his attempt to have some fun. And the guard? He stood as still as ever, a true symbol of resilience. His duty continued, along with the unspoken reminder of the respect for tradition he quietly upheld for everyone in the square.